On today's show, we're talking three big questions for the Milwaukee Bucks entering the 2023-2024 season, because I think that these are topics that if you're a Bucks fan, you're going to be tracking right throughout the season. We're going to talk Giannis, we're going to talk Brook Lopez, and we're also going to talk Pat Connaughton and whether he can have a big bounce back season this year. So there's plenty to get to as preseason gets very, very close. Let's get into
it. You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN. Riding solo today because there's a bunch of stuff that I wanted to get through on this podcast, but have no fear. The usuals, whether it's Frank, Justin, Camille, they're all going to be back this week. As we will also have another crossover podcast. I want to find out a little bit more about Ty Washington. So we're going to have a crossover with Locked On Rockets, who had a fascinating offseason themselves. They wanted to get involved in Brook Lopez, who we are going to talk about on today's podcast. So plenty to come on Locked On Bucks. And as always, we thank you for making this show your first watch or first listen of every single weekday. We appreciate the support. Preseason not far away. October 9. Just over a week and a half, around 2 weeks until preseason basketball gets underway. The post-game shows are going to be back, and we know that that's what all the listeners love. So we can't wait to see Bucks basketball, but we appreciate your support along the way. If you haven't done so yet, drop a like, a comment, subscribe, rate, review, and do all those things because it's free to do, and it really, really helps the show. Today's sponsor of the podcast is going to be FanDuel. This is the official sports book of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5. They get 200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started there with FanDuel. A bit more on that later. And as I mentioned, preseason not too far away, which means we are in a position where we can start to look at some of the big questions for this Milwaukee Bucks team. Now, I word this as big questions, not the absolute biggest questions. So there will be other topics that maybe the listeners want to talk about, or maybe there are bigger question marks. The health of Chris Middleton, Adrian Griffin coming in as a new head coach. So make sure you drop those comments and let us know. We'll continue to work through these over the next couple of weeks leading into the season. But let's also not mess around here. Let's get to the biggest name on the Bucks roster. And I think there is a question coming into this season surrounding Giannis. Now, we have discussed at length all the rumors, the reports. I think at this point in time, most people understand my view that I don't think Giannis has done anything that we shouldn't have expected this offseason. But I do want to ask one of the big questions this year is, could there be a quote-unquote bounce-back season for Giannis? And I say that as a guy that could have won the MVP last year, could have won Defensive Player of the Year. I thought he was unbelievable last season. But in terms of the scoring efficiency, in terms of his overall health, I think that we could be looking at a massive Giannis season. If you've been looking at social media today, you would have seen that he did practice and had his workouts with Hakeem. There was a number of photos online about that. I like it. I know people get skeptical about these types of workouts and what is the actual benefit going to be. But if you ask me, if you want Giannis working out with one of the all-time greats, big men scoring around the basket, I'll take it every single day of the week. Even if it is just for a few days or it is a week or whatever it may be, I think it's beneficial. But as far as Giannis goes, the big reason why I think that he can have a massive season this year for Milwaukee is because I think if you asked him and you had the chance to get the most honest answer of all time, I would just be curious to ask Giannis where he was at physically through last year's regular season and then leading into the postseason, where we know he was carrying a number of injuries, whether it was the knee, the hand/wrist, and then, of course, the back in the postseason. But he carried an unbelievable toll last year through the season. Usage percentage of 39.1% via cleaning the glass, the highest amount in the NBA. 39.1% usage. You consider to 2021, when the Bucks won the NBA championship, that was down at 33.6. He was asked to do a lot more last year, and a big reason for that was clearly the injuries right throughout the roster, but mostly Chris Middleton, who did not play for large portions of the season. I think due to that, and the responsibility of needing to do more and needing to carry this team and needing to be the guy to, honestly, probably unrealistic levels throughout the regular season to keep this team afloat, I think we saw his shot profile change a little bit. He was 59% of his shots came at the rim Again, 54% that was in the championship season. And you think about Giannis when he's getting to the basket, the types of shots that he's taking, the physical toll on his body. He's always on the floor. He's working through multiple bodies and multiple contact from the opposition, mostly even more so because of the fact that Chris Middleton, the major perimeter threat, wasn't there. I just think that Giannis would have gone through a lot last year on the back of repeated long postseason runs, World Cups, championships, all those types of things. So I think it might be a simple thing, but I think having all this time off in the offseason, hopefully he's in good shape. He's had a little knee scrape, the operation there. So I think that there's reason to believe that he's going to enter this season in as good a shape as he has in recent times. That's certainly what you see or what you hear. And I think that we could be in for a season where he can really take off in terms of getting that efficiency back to where it was a few years ago. Still elite last year, so we're absolutely nitpicking at the best player in the world. But I do think that the talk about what's going on outside this team, where he's at physically, I'm not concerned about it. I think we're going to have a massive year for Giannis. It could be third MVP on the way. I think due to that fatigue, due to the physical toll that he had on his body, you look at the free throw attempts, 12.3 per game. That was the highest mark in his career. And the free throw percentage dipped down to 64%. Again, he has not been a knockdown free throw shooter throughout his career. But I think taking that higher volume of shots at the rim, the higher responsibility, ball in his hands on the offense, I think that all took its toll. I think this year you can see that get back up to around 70%. And I know with Giannis, that's a difficult thing to predict, but I just think overall he will be in better shape. I think if you look at his true shooting percentage last year, this is probably a decent indication. And I'm sure that this is roughly the way it goes for most players across the league, but I think particularly when you think about Giannis and the way he plays the game. On 3 days rest last year, 66% true shooting percentage. On 2 days, that went down to 61. 1 day rest, it went down to 59. And then on 0 days rest, so back-to-backs, which he didn't play a lot of, it was down at 58%. So I think all these indicators suggest that Giannis should be in a good position to have a massive year and really see an uptick in those efficiency numbers from a scoring perspective. I think that his three-point attempts were well down last year. I think part of that was, again, not having his number one man next to him. So he probably felt more responsibility to carry the scoring load. We saw he averaged 31 points per game, a career high, which was unbelievable. But again, I've always been someone that cares more about the physical toll. And I just don't think he was in great shape come the postseason. And if you're a Milwaukee Bucks team that understands that you've got to get to the postseason and be in the best physical shape possible, that guy is the key. And ensuring that Giannis isn't overexerting himself on a nightly basis through 82 games or the 70 games that he'll play, I think will be key for this team. So I'm, to the surprise of probably no one, I'm incredibly optimistic about what Giannis can do this season. I think he's going to have a massive year. Knock on wood for the health stuff right across this whole roster. But I think whatever efficiency dip we saw last year, right through last year, that was my explanation. I thought he was being asked to do a little bit too much. And I think this year, pending health across the whole roster, I think it's going to be a massive season for Giannis, and I can't wait to see what he delivers, because I also think that he would be aware of the conversation going around the league. He sees this stuff. He would hear this stuff. And I think that kind of thing could be the type of situation that motivates him to say, hey, forget about all this stuff. I'm in Milwaukee right now. I want to win a title with this franchise, number 2 for this city. And I think he's going to be incredibly motivated to do so there. So I can't wait to watch Giannis this year. But next, I want to get to Brook Lopez, because if you look at what this guy did last year, his ability to continue that level of play could be a big factor for this Milwaukee Bucks team. But first, let's look at FanDuel, our sponsor of today's podcast, and snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action right now, because the app is very easy to use. And there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over and unders, and more. I always like to reference the Green Bay Packers at this point of the podcast to win the Super Bowl, plus 3,800, the Green Bay Packers. So they're well down the list there. But what an incredible win on the weekend. Jordan Love with the big fourth quarter comeback. So the Packers fans are feeling good about themselves. maybe you want to take a look at some of the odds they have there for the NFL season. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, let's roll on with Locked On Bucks for today. We are continuing the big questions. As I said right off the top, make sure you keep it locked on this channel and this network, wherever you're listening or watching the show, because we've got some big things coming up over the next couple of weeks as we get ourselves ready for the start of preseason, October 8th. It is, I get mixed up with my Australian dates, October 8th, Milwaukee versus Chicago, which has become kind of the preseason opener each year. But we can't wait. We're going to continue to build up. Make sure you drop your comments, suggestions for shows, guests, all those types of things. We appreciate the support there. Next big question for the Bucks this season: can Brook Lopez repeat 2022-2023? Well, the easy answer would be to suggest that this would be unlikely. Brook Lopez signing a 2-year deal, around $24 million per season there, unbelievably well-deserved. This has been one of the best big men in the league over the last 5 seasons since coming to Milwaukee. He's been criminally underpaid. He deserved this payday, and it comes off what might have been his best season across his whole entire NBA career. He was unbelievable last year, and he did that coming off back surgery, and he did that at 35 years of age. So he's going to turn 36 in April, Brook Lopez. That is worth noting because as much as we talk about the age of Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, this roster overall, Brook Lopez is 36. To do what he did last year was absolutely extraordinary. He averaged 15.7 points. That was the highest mark for him since 2017. 2.5 blocks per game. That was a career high. He played 30.4 minutes, and this is something I think you want to avoid this year. That was his highest mark since 2017 as well, again, coming off the back surgery. It's worth noting, and I've spoken to people around the Bucks, and I think it's been publicized that the back surgery that Brook ultimately went under after the title was something that could have been coming for years and years. He'd been battling with this back trouble. So maybe it is the case that this surgery has rejuvenated Brook Lopez to levels that maybe he didn't even believe was going to be the case. But I think the biggest change last year, and I'm fascinated to see how Adrian Griffin uses Brook Lopez in this offense, was the shot frequency from three-point land and two-point territory. Bucks fans on this channel, in the comments, on social media for years have been screaming more Brook Lopez. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a straight-up post moves and old school back to the basket. It doesn't have to be that. But I think what we've learned over the last 2 years is that Brook Lopez continues to be a dominant force if you can get him the ball within the perimeter, despite the fact that he has turned into an outside shooter and one of the best shooting big men across the league. I think if you want to look at the way the Bucks changed offensively, and again, maybe this had a little bit to do with Chris Middleton not being there last year, but 2019, when Mike Budenholzer came to Milwaukee, he clearly wanted to retool this offense, overhaul the way the Bucks played. He wanted a lot of shooting from the outside. This was the biggest mark that we saw after watching this team under Jason Kidd to Mike Budenholzer. Clear out for Giannis, give this man space, shoot a whole crap ton of threes, and see where it leaves you. And the offense went from being sputtering most of the time to very high-powered. In 2019, Brook Lopez only averaged 3.4 two-point attempts per game. Last year, he averaged 6.9. So in the space of that 5 years, and it's been creeping up year on year, as I think the Bucks figured out ways to use Brook. Can they use him differently if Giannis is on the bench? Can they use those two guys in tandem offensively? But in a 5-year span with Mike Budenholzer, Brook Lopez has doubled his two-point attempts. And the thing that was really remarkable about last year, with those 6.9 two-point attempts, he was 63.7% from the field on those, which was a career high mark on two-point attempts for Brook. So not only was his ability to play every night remarkable coming off the surgery, it was one of his most efficient seasons that he's ever played in the league as well. And then you combine the anchoring the defense with 2.5 blocks per game, a career high, a Defensive Player of the Year finalist, and many believe that he probably should have won that game, should have won that award. I'm one of those because of the continuity. I do think that it will be fascinating this year and I'm not just saying this because I haven't mentioned Joe Ingles on the podcast for a little while, but we marveled, and I think all Bucks fans marveled about the idea or the chemistry between Joe Ingles and Brook Lopez straight out of the gate for this Milwaukee Bucks team. Joe Ingles isn't going to be there. That was a big part of the Bucks offense down the stretch. I do think that Chris Middleton as a pick-and-roll ball handler is underrated. He's had an unbelievable partnership with Giannis. So will Adrian Griffin continue to look to use Brook Lopez within the perimeter on offense? And then what does that look like with Giannis on the floor and Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday? So I think it's a watch with Brook Lopez. I think over the years, he's been one of the better postseason performers for this team as well. It's just that year was so damn good last year that now another year under his belt, I don't expect a massive drop-off from Brook Lopez, but I'm just curious to see whether he can play to that level, because if he can, again, when you add in some of the other pieces the Bucks have been able to do, I think that it leaves them in a really good spot. So let us know what you think about Brook Lopez this year and how should they continue to use him with Giannis on the floor, because as we know, it is a little bit challenging. When you've got the most dominant downhill player in the league in Giannis, it's tough for Brook Lopez to be down there working, but will they continue to crash the offensive glass? Can he be a guy that they still use in those pick-and-roll scenarios? And what does the efficiency look like this season for Brook Lopez? He was an absolute joy to watch last year. So can he repeat or get near to what he did last year? I think it's going to be a watch point for the Bucks this season. One guy that is probably ready or hoping for a little bit of a bounce-back season will be Pat Connaughton, someone that for some reason, I'm not totally sure why, seems to be much maligned among Bucks fans, but I do want to talk about Pat Connaughton coming up here next, because I still believe he is going to be a very important player for this Milwaukee Bucks team throughout the regular season and perhaps more specifically during the playoffs. We'll get to that next. One more burning question for today's show, and it's going to be about Pat Connaughton, another one of those guys now that's been around the Bucks organization throughout the Budenholzer era, and now we'll see what it looks like for Adrian Griffin. He had a really tough year last year, Pat Connaughton. He had some calf issues, hamstring issues, a lot of lower body stuff. He's been such a reliable player for this Milwaukee Bucks team throughout this period of contention. And I think if you look at the lower body stuff, it can be easy to equate why perhaps the efficiency was significantly down for a guy that has been very reliable for this Bucks team over the seasons. And as I said, still a little bit confusing to me why he does seem to get a lot of criticism, certainly in our YouTube feed here on social media. So last year he played 61 games, Pat, 39% from the field, so not pretty, and down at 33% from the outside. He was up around 38% the last two seasons on pretty high volume. So he's a better shooter than that. And I think we saw glimpses of it last year, but he wasn't able to consistently do it. Again, we've discussed a lot about the idea of, could the Bucks make a trade? Could they look to upgrade this roster? And again, because of the salary that Pat's on, around that double-digit per year mark, which, by the way, to me, still an incredible value deal. He is probably underpaid based on what he's brought to the table over the last few years. Pat Connaughton finds himself in that mix with Bobby Portis and Grayson Allen. If you want to bring in a guy around that $20 million a season mark, you might have to add in two of those players. We've spoken about value a lot on this podcast, and I do think that Pat Connaughton, out of those three guys, probably has the highest value, because he is a guy that I can sit back and say, yes, you can play him in every single postseason series. You're looking for a bounce back from the shooting efficiency perspective, but I think Pat Connaughton has become a really trustworthy player. And he's your fifth, sixth, seventh guy. So I never understand why there is so much criticism for guys that are pretty reliable on both sides of the floor. He's athletic. He does a lot of little plays. He's a really elite rebounder for his position, particularly on the offensive glass. He has a great knack of picking up those long rebounds around the free throw area. So he's just active. So I just think he's a good player to have on your team. I don't understand how there can be criticism for Pat Connaughton. If you go back to the 2021 postseason, he shot 38% from three during the title run, hit a number of big shots. I think that goes under the radar a little bit. But perhaps the most important stat, and this will be something that we'll have to look at through this season, how does Adrian Griffin use him? because you have got Jay Crowder there. You're looking for a bounce back from him as well. You've got Malik Beasley coming into the mix, Marjon Beauchamp trying to get minutes. So there are other guys there. But is Pat Connaughton someone that locks himself back into those sort of closing lineups that we've seen a little bit with Bud, but certainly that went away last year a little bit, I think, again, because of the health stuff. In that 2021 postseason, there were only 3 players that averaged more fourth quarter minutes than Pat Connaughton for the Bucks: Giannis, Chris, and Drew Holiday. Pat averaged 7.6 fourth quarter minutes per game, and overall on the season, he led the team in total fourth quarter plus minus. He was an incredibly effective player. If he's your 5th guy on the floor, you can't leave him open because he will confidently look to shoot those shots, and he's hit some big shots throughout his postseason career and fourth quarter career with the Bucks. So he's legitimately a guy you can put on the floor, and I generally feel pretty comfortable about Pat Connaughton being out there. So I think he was missed last year when you think that he was probably not in his best shape. The guy that you traded for, again, that I just mentioned, Jay Crowder, he wasn't able to really get going in Milwaukee, and you want to see that back again. So I do think that there's room for upside when you're looking at the 7-8 man rotation of the Bucks. And Pat Connaughton, a guy that maybe gets overlooked a little bit, I'm looking at him and asking whether he can have a bounce back year, mostly from the health perspective, because I think he can be an important player for this team. So there's 3 big questions for me to watch this Bucks team this season. Giannis, I just think he's in for a monster year. Can Brook Lopez repeat or get close to what he did last year? And then Pat Connaughton, could the bounce back be on? Let us know your stories, though, on what you're watching and your big questions. Drop them in the YouTube comments or hit me on social media. We'll continue to roll with Locked On Bucks over the next few weeks. As I said, preseason opener versus Chicago, only a couple of weeks away. Hopefully, this has been a fun podcast for everyone. We're starting to get a little bit excited about the start of the NBA season. More Locked On Bucks coming up tomorrow. We'll catch you all there.